David, welcome back to the program. I understand you're in a polling place in Ohio right now?
Yeah, I'm right across the street from, we have a major polling place in the downtown library of Cincinnati, and that's where I am right now.
Very cool.
I'm spending the day going to different locations advocating for our big ballot initiative here, which is Issue 1, which would create an independent redistricting commission, which would be a massive win for democracy here in Ohio if it passes.
So that basically is ending gerrymandering. I understand from reading your newsletter that the language is so confusing that most people have no idea what it is they're voting for or against.
I mean, if you and I read the language, we would all vote the opposite way of how we want to, of how we intend, because the Republicans, including the ones in office who wrote the ballot language, they figured out that Ohioans across the board are sick of gerrymandering. So rather than actually debating on the merits, they have basically, it's been a big gaslighting for 3 months, while every newspaper across the spectrum would tell you voting yes is what gets the politicians away from gerrymandering, creates rules to prevent partisan gerrymandering, and creates an independent panel of citizens vote and gets rid of the current gerrymander maps. The Republicans have run around and actually they just say that vote no gets rid of gerrymandering.
Seriously?
And they wrote ballot language. Yeah, absolutely. And the worst part is, lying in a campaign is one thing, but when you lie on the ballot language, I call that an abuse of power.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done. So if you knew nothing about the issue and your goal was to end gerrymandering, you would read this ballot language and you would assume that voting no would get the job done when voting yes is what get the job done. So the reason I'm standing at these polls today is because this is sort of every voter at a time clarifying, you want to end gerrymandering, vote yes. And every once in a while, a Trump person chirps behind me, no, vote no. And it's like hand-to-hand combat, trying to get people to simply get their will expressed in their vote. Republicans have spent months now just trying to warp what they understand. They figured out finally, those citizens, how bad gerrymandering is.
Right.
Republicans have figured out that they figured it out. So now they're just trying to confuse them into voting no when they know that if it was a straight-up vote to end gerrymandering, it would pass 60% or more easily.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how, they can't win on the issues, so they just have to cheat. I mean, it's really pretty pathetic.
It is.
What's the state of the Senate race there? Sherrod Brown is, he's a friend of the show. He's on here regularly. He's a good guy. He's, I've known him for years. It would be bizarre to have him lose this seat.
Yeah, I think it's close. I mean, I would give him still the edge. Mm-hmm. He closed, his opponent, who just shouldn't be anywhere near being a senator, by the way. He's a car salesman, a lot of not so good practices, including wage theft, which he covered up by the shredding documents. All that's in the public record, so he just shouldn't be there. But he made a big mistake with about 2 months to go in the race. And this is, by the way, this is the most expensive Senate race in the history of the country, with all these ads. But his mistake was that with a tracker in the room taping it, he said he just couldn't understand why women over 50 care so much about abortion.
Right.
And that really, if Bernie Moreno goes on to lose, I think that will be seen as sort of the Madison Square Garden moment where he said something, he's on tape saying it, so it's not like it's secondhand. And if what we saw in that Iowa poll is happening in Ohio, that women in their 50s and 60s are showing up disproportionately because they remember, and this is to answer his question, they remember what it was like before Roe, so they're more horrified than people who've never seen that world. If we see that anything close to that trend here that Iowa poll detected, I think that could end up deciding the race. That women of all ages, but women particularly, who often may be more moderate Republicans, if they're voting in the same way we saw that Iowa poll, I think that it might be the end of Bernie Moreno's challenge against Sherrod Brown. I hope that's what happens. My hunch is, and Sherrod closed with very strong ads on that issue for the last couple of weeks.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, I'm one of those old people, and I remember in 1967, I think it was, in high school, there was a girl. My recollection is her name was Linda. I didn't know her well. In fact, I didn't know her personally at all. I just knew who she was, and she just vanished one day from school. And about 2 weeks later, we learned that she had had an abortion, an illegal abortion. Of course, it was illegal then, and bled out in her bedroom. and just, like literally, like went to bed bleeding and just bled out, and her parents found her dead body the next day. I mean, those stories are not unusual.
No, well, it's interesting is the minute that candidate, Sherrod's opponent, said that, I drove to my mother's house. My parents are in their mid-80s. Her father was an OBGYN. She has been fighting this battle her whole life because she remembers her father coming home, and he would explain how much, people would go and get an illegal abortion. They would be butchered, and some never be able to have kids. And he would tell my mom, they are the lucky ones because some just never come back. She used almost the exact words you did. And so that's why I think Bernie Moreno sort of grabbed was the dog that grabbed the tire. He said that to women who have real memory of what things were like before Roe, and that's exactly why they care so much. They don't want they've spent their whole lives seeing that it's been better, and telling my mom in her mid-80s, in your mid-80s, we're going to go back to the world that was horrible, that you grew up in, that your father told you about, is such a nightmare that I think that could end up being a real turning point, not just in the Senate election, but in Kamala Harris beating Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's amazing. My sense of it is, we're talking with David Pepper, the former head of the Democratic Party in Ohio and professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law and author of davidpepper.substack.com. You've got to subscribe to his newsletter. My sense of it, David, is that this election is going to be a blowout, that Democrats all across the country are going to do really, really well. And I'm hopeful that we can hold the Senate. What's your sense of how things are going?
I hope you're right. I certainly think we have the momentum. I don't think it's just sort of one poll. I think that my hope is, and my hope is that we get a blowout, not only because that would somehow feel good. I do hope a blowout would get us past the Trump era. I don't be naive about it, but at some point, if the guy has lost every election since 2016, which he has, if he loses today,
which was a fluke.
Maybe it's. Right, which was a fluke, unexpected, but 18, 20, 22. If he loses now, that's we want people in the other party to start figuring out that this is a losing proposition. All the disturbing stuff, all the crazy stuff. But the second thing is, the temptation, if it's close, we know what they're going to try and do. They're going to try and undo it, probably in a more sophisticated way than January 6th. If we see tonight a blue North Carolina or an Iowa, let's say, that flips blue, if it is a blowout, I think that really reduces. I mean, I think everyone should, including the DOJ, should be, prepared for anything. I was glad to see the Pennsylvania or the DA from Philadelphia say, "Don't mess here, F around and find out." But I do think at a certain point, if you're asked to do something is wrong, some people respond like they did on January 6th. But if it looks like North Carolina is blue, you might give a second thought, like, I'm not going to do that. The guy lost. I'm not going to risk my, liberty or risk coming a side of the law when it looks very clear that he lost, even in states he wasn't supposed to lose. So my hope for all of us, so we have a smooth transition and not the chaos that Donald Trump wants, is in the same way that Arizona was called at 10 p.m. 4 years ago. My hope is we have a state that surprises us, that ends the drama before Donald Trump tries to start it. Yeah,
and there's a couple of bellwether states. Virginia is probably the top of the list, that will tell us going to go nationally, and will probably tell us tonight. It's going to be real interesting. Last question for you, David. If Trump loses and loses big and, kind of goes into obscurity or off to prison or whatever, how does the Republican Party put itself back together? Do they? It seems to me like they've got basically three options. They can go back to being the kind of scam party of Ronald Reagan and Mitt Romney, where they pretend to be there for the average person, but really they're just there for the plutocrats. Or they can, continue down this George Wallace road of being the party of segregation and hate, or they can actually reform and go back to the Republican Party of Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft and invite some progressives into their party and kind of open themselves up. The Dwight Eisenhower party. What's your sense of which way they would go?
My guess is most likely the second. I mean, meaning continue to go downhill.
Yeah.
Think about drain the party of funds One reason, if we win, one reason will be because he took the funds that were meant to get the vote out and help down to candidates, and he's pilfering them for his own legal bills.
Yeah.
Would you give to that party even if you were an old school Republican? I wouldn't. It's a waste of money. You're not giving to a mission of anything but helping Donald Trump. I don't think they're going to let go. I think it's his power source. So I think that, this is about America and what happens in America. But if he loses, the Republican Party brand is truly broken. It's only him. Mm-hmm. It's especially broken with younger generations who have only ever seen him as the Republican Party. I think they're terrible. They're in terrible shape financially. I mean, I don't want to get carried away, but if you're someone like a Liz Cheney or one of the rare Republicans who've called him out, I mean, the idea of retaking over the party would seem like a less viable path than legitimately trying to start another party.
Yeah,
because I think he will not let go of it. It will still be a source of money for him. And as we've seen in these primaries and throughout this entire presidential process, most Republicans are still too cowardly, even if they know better, to truly stand up to it. So I don't see some moment of like, oh my God, of an epiphany to change it. I think it will be a really devastating moment for a party that's lost its way and lost most of its money because of it.
Yeah, and it all started with Reagan. I mean, that was really when the party just went nuts. And not that they hadn't been for a while. David Pepper, check out his newsletter, davidpepper.substack.com, Pepper Perspectives. It's brilliant. David, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thank you. Appreciate checking in.
Always great having you on the program. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.